3 months after the Battle of Earth, as historians would come to call it. The galaxy looked nothing like it had before. The Galactic Council had fractured into a dozen pieces. Elder species retreating to their homeworlds while young. Civilizations declared independence and reached out to each other for the first time. Without asking permission, trade routes that had been controlled for millennia were suddenly open to everyone, and information that had been suppressed for generations flowed freely across the stars. Ambassador Yoon Jae-won returned to Station Meridian, aboard a diplomatic shuttle that no longer needed to hide its true capabilities. Escorted by ships that openly displayed technology the Council had called impossible, the station itself had changed during her absence. Council symbols removed from public spaces and replaced by neutral markers that represented no single power. She was not returning to the old Council chambers. Those rooms stood empty now, monuments to an era that had ended in fire and truth. Instead, she was heading to a new meeting hall that had been constructed in the station's neutral zone, a space where 47 species had gathered to discuss what came next. The Tanari were there, young and eager to build something better than what they had inherited. The Shen were there, a species that had been on the edge of extinction before the precursor medical data saved millions of their children. The Kalori were there, former Council allies who had quietly supported humanity during the crisis and now wanted to be part of whatever rose from the ashes. Even some of the elder species sent observers, beings who had once ruled without question and now watched nervously as the children they had dominated took control of their own futures. Jae-won entered the meeting hall and found her designated seat, surrounded by representatives of species that had never sat as equals before. At the front of the room, a raised platform waited for someone to speak first. She was not surprised when her own name was called Ambassador Yoon. The Tanari representative said, "You speak for the species that broke the Council's power, and we believe it is fitting that you address this assembly first." Jae-won rose slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room upon her. She thought about all the years she had spent as a diplomat, negotiating from weakness with beings who saw humanity as children to be controlled. Those days were over now, but the days ahead would be harder. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems that filled the hall. "I will speak, but I want to begin with something important." She paused, looking around at faces of every shape and color. Humanity did not break the Council's power to claim it for ourselves, and we did not reveal the precursor data to become the new rulers of the galaxy. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Beings who had expected exactly that sort of declaration, uncertain what to make of her words. "We acted because the Council threatened to murder 12 million of our people, just to make a point." Jae-won continued, "We acted because 40,000 years of lies and suppression had to end. And we acted because we believe that every species in this room deserves the chance to reach their full potential. Not as subjects of an empire, but as equals in a community." The Tanari representative spoke up. "Then, what do you propose?" "Ambassador, I propose that we build something new," Jae-won said. "Not a council that rules, but an assembly that coordinates. Not a hierarchy that suppresses, but a network that shares. The precursor data belongs to everyone." She continued, "Every species should have access to the medical advances, the energy systems, the technologies that the Council kept hidden. And every species should have a voice in how we move forward together." A Shen delegate raised one of their 3 arms. "What about the weapon your people used?" they asked. "The severance engine, as you called it. What guarantee do we have that humanity will not use it against us?" Jae-won had expected this question, had discussed it with Earth government for weeks before coming here. "The severance engine is being dismantled as we speak," she said. "Our scientists are destroying the components and erasing the research that created it." Shocked silence filled the hall. you would give up such power?" the Kellish observer demanded, their golden fur rippling with disbelief. "It was only ever meant to be used once." J1 replied, "We built it because we knew the Council would never negotiate fairly with us. Because we needed a way to prove that we could not be controlled or conquered. That proof has been given. And now the weapon has no purpose except to make others fear us." She looked at the Kellish directly. "We do not want to be feared. We want to be respected, and respect must be earned through actions, not threats." Dr. Beak Yuno watched the assembly from a viewing screen aboard her transport ship. The vessel carrying her away from Neptune's orbit and the empty station where the Severance engine had been housed. The dismantling was complete. The terrible weapon reduced to components that could never be reassembled. The knowledge locked away in her mind, and a handful of secure files that would be destroyed when she returned to Earth. She felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of potential destruction lifted from her shoulders. She had helped build something terrible, and she had used it to save her people. Now she would spend the rest of her life trying to make up for both on Station Meridian. Fleet Commander Park Soo-min arrived at the new assembly hall in time to hear the final speeches. She stood in the back of the room, watching Ambassador Yoon handle questions from dozens of species with the grace and skill that had made her humanity's best diplomatic voice. The young species asked about trade and cooperation and shared research. The former council powers asked about security and boundaries and guarantees. Everyone asked about the future, because for the first time in 40,000 years, the future was not predetermined by beings who had already decided what everyone else was allowed to become. When the session ended, Park found J1 in a quiet corridor outside the hall. "They will ask humanity to lead this new assembly." Park said, "They already have." J1 replied, "And I refused on behalf of Earth." Good. Park looked out a window at the stars, at the vast darkness that held more potential now than it had in millennia. "We did not end the old order just to become the new version of it." "No," J1 agreed. "We ended it because some lines must never be crossed. Because threatening the innocent is unforgivable. Because hoarding hope when others are dying is a crime against everything that makes civilization worthwhile." And now, J1 smiled. A real smile that reached her tired eyes. "Now we find out if the galaxy can grow into something worth protecting." She turned away from the window and walked back toward the assembly hall, where representatives of 47 species were waiting to build a future that no one had ever imagined possible. Behind her, Park watched the stars and thought about everything humanity had learned since they first reached into the void. They had learned that the universe was larger and stranger than anyone expected. They had learned that ancient powers would try to control them. They had learned that they could fight back and win, but the most important lesson was still ahead. Now they had to learn how to use their strength without becoming the monsters they had overcome. The galaxy was watching, and humanity, as always, would find a way forward. Commander Park Soo-min watched the impossible happen on her display screens. The beam of light that moved faster than anything should be able to move, striking two targets separated by 40 light-years in the same heartbeat. The Council flagship simply ceased to exist along a perfect cylindrical path. A hole punched through reality itself that left nothing behind, no debris, no radiation. No evidence that the ship had ever been there, except for the absence where it should have been around the Sol system. 4,000 enemy warships went silent. Every sensor, every communication channel, every tactical display froze as beings across a dozen species tried to process what they had just witnessed. Their flagship was gone. Their military command station was gone, and they had no idea what had just happened. Park opened BROADCST channel that would reach every ship in the system, both human and alien. And she took a deep breath before speaking. "This is Fleet Commander Park Soo-min of the Earth Defense Force," she said, her voice carrying across the void with cold clarity. "You have just witnessed a demonstration of the precursor weapon known as the Severance Engine." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Admiral Keswick's threatened to murder 12 million civilians in 3 human cities, and his threat has been answered on screens throughout the Council fleet." Commanders and captains stared at their displays with expressions that ranged from shock to terror. The Severance Engine is now aimed at every Council homeworld simultaneously, Park continued. "It can strike any target instantaneously across any distance, and there is no defense against it." She thought about the words she had to say next. The terrible ultimatum that would define humanity's place in galactic history. "You have 1 hour to withdraw beyond the outer planets of this system, and if you do not comply, you will share the fate of your flagship." The broadcast ended, and silence filled the void for several long minutes. Nothing happened. The Council fleet hung motionless in space, commanders frantically communicating with each other and with their governments back home, trying to understand what they faced and how to respond. Then, one by one, ships began to move. The Kelish were first, their golden vessels turning away from Earth and accelerating toward the outer system with all possible speed. The crystal beings followed, their ships pulsing with frantic colors that might have been fear or panic or some emotion humans could not name. Species after species broke formation and fled, commanders choosing survival over pride, as they recognized that the rules of the game had fundamentally changed within 30 minutes. The only ships remaining near Earth were those too damaged or slow to retreat quickly. Park watched them go and felt no joy, only a hollow emptiness where satisfaction should have been. They had won. Humanity had proven they could not be threatened or controlled, but the cost of that proof hung in the back of her mind like a shadow. She opened a private channel to Admiral Choi Minho aboard the Defiance. "The Council fleet is withdrawing," she reported. "What are your orders?" Minho's face on the screen looked older than it had an hour ago, lines of grief carved into features that had always seemed so strong. "Let them go," he said quietly. "We have made our point, and if they regroup, if they come back with more ships, then we will make our point again." Minho rubbed his eyes with one weathered hand. "But I do not think they will come back." "Commander, not for a very long time." Park nodded, understanding what he meant. The Council had ruled through fear for 40,000 years. Fear of their military power and their economic control and their ability to crush any species that challenged them. Now, that fear pointed in the other direction. Now the galaxy feared humanity. She was not sure if that was better or worse. Back on Station Meridian, Ambassador Yoon Jae-won received news of the battle through channels that moved faster than official reports. The Council representatives had evacuated their offices, fleeing to ships that would carry them home to governments that no longer had the power to threaten anyone. The hallways that had been filled with chaos were now empty. Beings of every species huddled in their quarters and wondering what would happen next. Jae-won walked through those empty corridors alone, her footsteps echoing off walls that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic diplomacy. She stopped at a viewing window that looked out on the stars, thinking about everything humanity had accomplished and everything they had destroyed to get here. Her tablet buzzed with an incoming message, and she read it with a small nod of acknowledgement. The Council's governing body had collapsed, elder species withdrawing from the alliance, and young species demanding immediate reforms. 3 major powers had already declared independence from Council authority. 7 more were expected to follow within days. The old order was crumbling, and no one knew what would rise in its place. A voice spoke behind her, and Jae-won turned to find the Tenari. diplomat she had spoken with earlier, standing in the corridor with a look of desperate hope on their features. Ambassador Yoon. Is it true? They asked. Did humanity really destroy the Council fleet with a single weapon? We destroyed their flagship and their command station. J1 corrected gently. The rest of the fleet retreated. But you could have destroyed them all. J1 was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Yes, she finally said. We could have. Why did you not? It was a good question. One that J1 suspected would be asked many times in the coming years. Because we are not like them, she said. The Council threatened to kill millions of our people to force our surrender. To make an example of us that would frighten every other species into obedience. She turned back to the stars. To the endless darkness filled with worlds she would never see. We showed them that we have the power to do the same thing on a scale they cannot imagine. But we chose not to use that power. Why not? Because killing is easy and building is hard. J1 looked at the young diplomat with eyes that had seen too much in 50 years of service. The Council could have shared the precursor knowledge with everyone and built a galaxy where every species thrived. But they chose to hoard and control and dominate instead. And humanity will choose differently, J1 smiled. Though it did not reach her eyes, we will try, she said. That is all anyone can do. The Tanari diplomat nodded slowly. Something like determination settling into their features. That my people will help you try, they said. Whatever comes next. We stand with humanity. As they spoke, similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. Beings of every species looking at the ruins of the old order and wondering if something better could rise from the ashes. Humanity had proven they could end the Council's rule with a single strike. Now they had to prove they could build something worthy of the power they held, and that, J1 knew, would be far harder than any battle. The Council fleet arrived in the Sol system like a wave of steel and fire. 4,000 warships from 12 different species, forming a wall of destruction around humanity's homeworld. Admiral Choi Minho stood on the bridge of the carrier Defiance, watching the enemy forces take position through sensors that tracked every ship with cold precision. His own fleet numbered 260 vessels, the public force that the Council knew about. Positioned between Earth and the approaching armada, the odds were terrible. But he had faced worse during the border conflicts 20 years ago. And he had learned then that numbers did not always decide battles. Still, this was different. This was everything's status report, he said, his voice carrying across the bridge with practiced authority. All civilian evacuation transports have cleared the orbital stations. Admiral, his tactical officer replied, ground shelters report 94% capacity, and the hidden fleet, Commander Park reports ready. Holding position beyond detection range, Minho nodded. Some small part of his tension easing. The Council saw only the ships in front of them, the small force that they expected to crush without effort. They did not know about the 2,000 vessels waiting in the darkness, or the weapon that could end this conflict in a single heartbeat. But he hoped he would not need any of that. He hoped the Council would see reason, would accept that their time of absolute dominance was ending, and choose to negotiate rather than fight. He hoped. But he did not believe. The communication screen at his station flickered to life, and the face of a Vorthan admiral appeared. Gray skin stretched tight over sharp bones, and forearms folded in what humans had learned was a gesture of superiority. I am Admiral Kesix of the Combined Council Fleet, the alien said, its translator rendering the words in a cold mechanical voice. You will surrender immediately and prepare for boarding. Admiral Choi Minho. Earth Defense Force. Minho replied, I am authorized to negotiate terms for peaceful resolution of this conflict. Kesix made a sound that the translator identified as contempt. There is nothing to negotiate. Human, and your species has committed crimes against galactic order by releasing the precursor data. We released the truth, Minho said steadily. The Council has been lying to every species in the galaxy for 40,000 years. The Council has been maintaining stability and preventing chaos. And you have destroyed that stability with your reckless actions. We offered to share the precursor knowledge with everyone equally. And your response was to send a fleet to threaten our homeworld. Kezix's four arms unfolded, each one gesturing in a different direction, as if conducting some violent symphony. Your homeworld is not threatened as long as you surrender. But if you do not, the Vorthan paused, and something shifted in his expression that Minho did not like. If you do not surrender, I am authorized to take punitive action against civilian targets. The bridge went silent. Minho felt cold spread through his chest, a sensation he had not experienced since his first battle 30 years ago. Clarify your statement. Admiral, Kezix's face twisted into something that might have been a smile on a human, but looked like a predator baring its teeth. My fleet will bombard 3 human cities as demonstration of Council resolve, he said. Sol, Snow Paulo, and Legas have been selected as targets, and you have 1 hour to surrender before bombardment begins. Those cities contain 12 million civilians. Then 12 million civilians will die, and the blame will rest on your government for defying the Council. Minho's hands gripped the edge of his command console so hard that the metal creaked under his fingers around him. Bridge officers turned to stare at the screen with expressions ranging from horror to fury. You would murder 12 million innocent people to force our surrender. I would demonstrate the consequences of defiance. Kezix replied, This is how order is maintained, human. And your species should have learned your place when you had the chance. The transmission ended, and Minho stood frozen for a long moment while his mind processed what he had just heard. The Council was not going to negotiate. They were not going to blockade and wait for surrender. They were going to kill millions of humans just to prove a point, to show every other species what happened to those who challenged their authority. This was the line. This was the moment that changed everything. He opened a secure channel to Commander. Park aboard the Indomitable, you heard. He said, We heard, Park replied, her face pale but her voice steady. Orders from Earth? Minho checked his command console, where a priority message was already waiting. He read it twice, feeling the weight of history settling onto his shoulders like a physical burden. The message contained only 2 words. Do it. Earth has authorized the use of the Severance engine, he said quietly. Dr. Beak is standing by. Park nodded, and Minho could see her struggling with the same emotions that churned in his own chest. This was not how any of them wanted this to end. They had built the weapon hoping never to use it, hoping that its existence alone would be enough to deter aggression. But the Council had crossed a line that no human could accept. They had threatened children and families and innocent people who had nothing to do with politics or power. They had proven that they would never stop, never negotiate, never treat humanity as anything other than subjects to be controlled. Give Dr. Beak the order, Minho said, and may whatever gods exist forgive us for what we are about to do. The channel closed, and Minho turned back to his bridge crew. All ships, defensive formation around Earth, he ordered. Prepared to protect civilian evacuation routes. Admiral, his tactical officer said hesitantly, If we engage the Council fleet with our current numbers, we are not going to engage them. Lieutenant Minho looked at the vast display screen where 4,000 enemy ships surrounded his world like sharks circling wounded prey. Something else is going to engage them first, beyond Neptune's orbit, in the heavily shielded laboratory that had been her home for 5 years. Dr. Beak Una received the order she had prayed would never come her. Hands did not shake as she entered them. Authorization codes. her voice did not waver as she confirmed the target coordinates. She was calm, because she had accepted long ago that this moment might arrive, and she had made peace with her role in it. The Severance engine hummed to life around her. Ancient precursor technology married to human engineering in a fusion that should have been impossible. She thought about the Vorthan admiral who had threatened to murder 12 million people. She thought about the cities he had named. Seoul, where her grandmother still lived. São Paulo, where her best friend had moved after university. Lagos, where her former student was raising a family. She thought about what the council had done for 40,000 years, suppressing knowledge and condemning billions to suffer for their own power. And she pressed the button. The universe screamed. A beam of pure annihilation erupted from the station, crossing the solar system faster than light itself and striking Admiral Keswick's flagship with absolute precision. The massive warship did not explode. It simply stopped existing along a perfect cylindrical path carved through its center. Matter erased from reality as if it had never been. The beam continued, reaching across 40 light years in the same instant to strike the Council's primary military command station. Another perfect hole. Another demonstration of power that no species in the galaxy had ever witnessed. Dr. Beak watched her screens and felt tears streaming down her face. It was done. Humanity had crossed a line of their own, and nothing would ever be the same. The data packet left Earth at exactly midnight, Greenwich Mean Time, traveling through channels that the Galactic Council did not know existed and reaching every inhabited world in known space within 6 hours. It was the largest single release of information in galactic history, and it changed everything on Station Meridian. Ambassador Yoon Jae-won watched from her office window as chaos erupted in the corridors below. Beings of every species crowding around public display screens that showed the same damning evidence over and over again. The Precursor Archive, humanity called it. A collection of records left behind by a civilization that had existed millions of years before the first Council species learned to make fire. The precursors had seeded the galaxy with gifts, technology and knowledge meant to help younger species grow and thrive and reach their full potential. The Council had found those gifts first, and they had buried them. J1's tablet buzzed constantly, with incoming messages from other ambassadors, demands for explanation and confirmation and denial. But she ignored them all. The evidence spoke for itself. Faster than light communication technology that would allow instant contact across any distance. Suppressed by the Council to maintain their control over information flow. Medical advances that could extend lifespans by centuries and cure diseases that killed millions every year. Hidden away to keep populations dependent on Council-approved treatments. Clean energy systems that would end resource scarcity forever. Locked in vaults to preserve the economic power of species that controlled traditional fuel sources. The precursors had documented everything before they vanished, recording how the original Council founders had discovered their caches of knowledge and decided to keep it for themselves. They had watched as younger species struggled and suffered, and died from problems that could have been solved. And they had done nothing except maintain their own dominance. 40,000 years of lies. 40,000 years of unnecessary death. And now everyone knew in the Council chambers. Emergency session had been called 3 times in 6 hours as representatives screamed at each other in languages that translators struggled to process. The Vorthan delegation denied everything until confronted with their own ancestors. Signatures on suppression orders. The Kellish tried to argue that the evidence was fabricated until a young species called the Tanari produced physical artifacts from their own world that matched precursor descriptions exactly. The crystal beings simply went dark, their colors fading to gray as they retreated into whatever passed for shock among their kind fleet commander Park. Su Min watched all of this from her command station aboard the carrier Indomitable. Hidden in the shadow of a rogue planet 3 light years from Earth, her orders were simple. Wait, watch, and be ready. The shipyard behind her contained humanity's real fleet. Not the 300 vessels the Council knew about, but nearly 2,000 ships built in secret over the past 50 years. Humanity had never trusted the Council. Not from the first moment of contact, when they realized that every other species accepted terms that no human would tolerate. So they had prepared. They had found the precursor archive and kept it hidden. While they built their strength, they had developed technology in secret, using knowledge the Council thought was impossible, creating weapons and defenses that no one expected. And now they had fired the first shot. Not with missiles or energy beams, but with truth. Commander Park reviewed the latest intelligence reports. Watching Council military forces mobilize across a dozen sectors, the elder species were predictable in their response, gathering their fleets and preparing to crush the upstart humans who had dared to challenge their authority. They did not realize that their communications were compromised, that humanity could read every order they sent almost as soon as they sent it. The order came 12 hours after the data release. All available Council military units were to converge on the Sol system and establish a blockade around Earth if humanity did not surrender and retract the precursor data within 72 hours. Military action would begin. Park read the orders and felt something cold settle in her chest. This was the moment they had prepared for. The confrontation they had always known was coming. But preparation did not make it easier to face. She opened a channel to her captains, all of them veterans who had served humanity in 100 different conflicts before the galaxy even knew they existed. "You have all seen the Council orders," she said, her voice steady despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. "They intend to blockade Earth and force our surrender." Faces on screens around her nodded grimly. "We will not engage unless they cross the line." Park continued, "Our orders are clear. Protect Earth and our people, but do not fire first." Captain Cho Yunbai, commander of the destroyer Relentless, spoke up. "And if they do cross the line?" "Commander," Park thought about the weapon hidden in the outer solar system, the thing they had built using precursor knowledge that even the archive had labeled as dangerous. She thought about what it could do and what using it would mean. "Then we end this," she said simply. Once and forever. The channel closed, and Park turned back to her display screens, watching the vast darkness of space where enemy fleets were gathering like storm clouds on a distant horizon. Somewhere behind her, in a heavily shielded laboratory orbiting Neptune, DRB Cuna ran final checks on a device that should not exist. The precursors had called it the Severance Engine, a weapon designed to remove matter from reality itself across any distance instantaneously. They had built it to defend against threats that no longer existed. And then they had dismantled it because they understood how terrible it was humanity had rebuilt it. Dr. Beak did not enjoy her work, did not take pride in creating something capable of such destruction. But she understood why it was necessary. The Council would never accept humanity as equals, would never stop trying to control and suppress and dominate. The only language they truly understood was power, and humanity was about to speak it fluently. She finished her checks and sent a brief message to Earth. The Severance Engine was ready. Now all they could do was hope they would never need to use it. Back on Station Meridian, Ambassador Yoon Jae-won finally answered one of the many calls flooding her communication system. The face that appeared on her screen belonged to a Tanari diplomat, young and frightened but burning with something that might have been hope. "Ambassador Yoon, my government wants to know if the precursor data is authentic." Jae-won nodded slowly. "Every word of it." "Then the Council has been lying to us for thousands of years. Yes. The Tanari was quiet for a moment, processing implications that would reshape their entire understanding of galactic history. What happens now? They finally asked. J1 looked out her window at the chaos still unfolding on Station Meridian, at beings confronting truths they had never imagined and a future no one could predict. Now we find out what kind of galaxy we want to live in, she said, and whether the Council will let us build it peacefully, or force us to tear down everything they have created. The Tanari diplomats straightened, something hardening in their expression. My people stand with humanity, they said. Whatever comes next. The call ended, and J1 allowed herself a moment of hope despite everything. The Council had made enemies across the galaxy through 40,000 years of suppression and control. Now those enemies had a champion willing to fight. She just prayed the fight would not cost too much. The message arrived at exactly noon, station time. And Ambassador Yoon J1 read it 3 times before setting down her data tablet on the polished desk that the Council had provided for humanity's first permanent diplomatic office on Station Meridian. She had expected something like this. The Galactic Council had governed known space for 40,000 years, and they did not welcome newcomers who refused to bow and scrape and beg for scraps from their table. 12 elder species sat on the council. Ancient civilizations that had mastered interstellar travel when humanity still lived in caves and painted animals on stone walls. They controlled trade routes, military forces, and most importantly, they controlled information. Every species that wanted to join galactic society had to accept their terms. Every species had to know their place. Humanity had been in space for only 200 years. A blink of an eye compared to the Council races. But they had already established 17 colony worlds, built a fleet of 300 vessels, and begun experiments with hyperspace manipulation that made the elder species very nervous. The Council did not like nervous feelings. They preferred obedience. J1 stood and walked to the window of her office, looking out at the vast station that surrounded her small corner of human territory. Station Meridian was a marvel of engineering. A rotating ring 50 kilometers across that served as the neutral ground where all species met to conduct business and resolve disputes. Millions of beings from hundreds of worlds lived here, worked here, and watched each other with careful eyes. The humans had arrived 18 months ago, eager to trade and learn and make friends. They had found something very different waiting for them. A chime sounded at her door, and J1 composed her face into the calm mask she had learned to wear in her 30 years of diplomatic service. She pressed the entry button and watched as 3 council representatives glided into her office. The first was a Vorthan, tall and thin with gray skin and 4 arms that moved constantly as if conducting invisible music. The second was a Kalish, short and round with golden fur and eyes like black marbles. The third was something she had never seen before, a being made of what looked like living crystal, shifting colors playing across its surface like oil on water. The Vorthan spoke first, its translator device turning clicks and whistles into flat English words. Ambassador Yoon, you have received our communication. I have, J1 replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. Then you understand what is required of your species. J1 picked up her tablet and read aloud from the message, wanting them to hear the words they had written. The Galactic Council has determined that humanity represents a developmental hazard to galactic stability and must accept the following terms within 90 standard cycles. She paused and looked at each of the 3 beings before continuing. Term 1. Immediate dismantling of all military vessels capable of interstellar travel, with Council observers present to verify compliance. The Vorthan nodded its narrow head. Term 2. Surrender of all research materials related to hyperspace manipulation, faster than light communication, and advanced weapons development. The Kellish made a sound that might have been agreement. Term 3. Permanent observer status in council proceedings. With no voting rights and no ability to propose legislation for a minimum period of 10,000 years. The crystal being pulsed with soft blue light, J1 set down the tablet and folded her hands in front of her. And if humanity refuses these terms, the Vorthan's forearms stopped moving. A sign she had learned meant serious intent. Economic isolation will begin immediately, and military correction will follow if necessary. Military correction, J1 repeated, letting the words hang in the recycled air of her office. You are threatening to attack Earth and our colonies if we do not give up everything we have built. We are offering you a choice, the Kellish said, its voice surprisingly deep for such a small creature. Accept your place in the natural order, or face the consequences of defiance. J1 almost smiled, but she held it back. These beings had no idea what they were dealing with. They had studied humanity through spy probes and intercepted communications and careful observation of human behavior on the station. They thought they understood the small, soft creatures from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. They were so very wrong. I will need time to consult with my government, J1 said, her tone revealing nothing of her thoughts. 30 cycles. The Vorthan replied, no more. That is acceptable. The three representatives seemed surprised by her calm response. They had expected fear, perhaps anger, maybe desperate negotiation. Instead, they received polite acceptance and a request for time. The crystal being spoke for the first time, its voice like wind chimes in a storm. You do not seem troubled by our terms, Ambassador. J1 met its shifting gaze without flinching. I am a diplomat, honored representative, and my personal feelings have no place in matters of state. Other species have wept when receiving such news, the Kellish observed. Other species have begged for mercy or made wild threats they could not support. Humanity is not other species, J1 said simply. The Vorthan's arms began moving again, faster than before. You believe you can resist us, and that belief is dangerous. Ambassador, I believe nothing except that my government deserves the chance to respond to your generous offer, J1 replied. And this time, she did allow herself a small smile. 30 cycles is sufficient time for them to consider all options. The representatives exchanged glances that communicated more than words could express. They had come expecting to deliver crushing news to a young species that would crumble before their ancient authority. Instead, they had found a human woman who looked at them like they were children playing at power. It unsettled them, and J1 was glad to see it after the representatives left. She locked her office door and activated the secure communication system that only she and Earth's leadership knew existed. It used technology the Council had never seen. Based on principles they had declared impossible, the face of General Director Kim Tae-young appeared on their screen within seconds. The leader of Earth's unified government, looking tired but alert, they delivered the ultimatum. J1 said, "We expected as much." Kim replied, "What is your assessment of their commitment to military action?" "They will attack if we refuse, and they believe we have no way to stop them." Kim nodded slowly, his weathered face showing the weight of the decision that rested on his shoulders. "Then we proceed with the revelation protocol." J1 felt her heart beat faster despite her training. "Sir, once we release the precursor data, there is no going back. The Council drew the line, Ambassador, and they chose to stand on the wrong side of it." Kim leaned closer to the camera, his eyes hard with determination. "They have kept the galaxy in chains for 40,000 years, and humanity will not add ourselves to their collection." "Understood." "Sir, you have 30 cycles to prepare, and when the time comes, you will deliver our response in person." The screen went dark. and J1 stood alone in her office, surrounded by the hum of alien machinery and the weight of coming change. She thought about the artifact buried beneath Europa's ice, the ancient archive that human explorers had discovered by accident and kept secret at terrible cost. She thought about what it contained and what it proved. The Galactic Council believed they held all the power in this confrontation. They were about to learn how wrong they were.